Someone asking the permission.
Yeah, Keith and Stephen and I will let them in, and we can all do it.
That's Margaret here now.
Oh, I'll make her a co-host in just a minute. Is it there? It still seems to be going round and round, is it?
Yeah, I can't see it Facebook yet, no.
It says it's live from my...
Yes, it is, but it's not on. It's not appeared on Facebook yet.
It's live on Facebook, it says.
It says, but it, whether it's still going round in circles, I think. Ah, yeah. No, it's there, isn't it? I can, yeah. Okay. So I'll just put that to record as well. Okay, so thanks everybody for your patience waiting. And just to introduce myself again, so I'm Sarah Glynn, I'm co-convener of Scottish Solidarity with Kurdistan. And just to, sorry, if other people could turn off microphones just so that, while other people are speaking, that probably helps. Sorry, that's it. So yeah, so just welcome again to our 9th Kurdish Tuesday, when we're going to be looking at Rojhelat. So that's East Kurdistan, or the western part of Iran. And sadly and ashamedly, really, we often only hear about Rojhelat when someone's about to be executed there, I think. So really glad to have Kamal Soleimani, who's Professor of Middle Eastern Studies in El Colegio de Mexico, to help fill in that information gap. I confess actually that in arranging these talks, I've often been guided by what I myself would like to know more about. And luckily, to judge by the numbers who watch our videos, plenty of others share that same need for knowledge and information. And in fact, the need to know more about Rojhelat must somehow be in the air at the moment, because Peace in Kurdistan has just produced a list of the latest news from Iran, which we've shared on our Facebook page. So if you want to read lots more, that's there. We've also got, for those on Zoom, and we'll share it on Facebook as well. So Kamal's given us the link to his academic page with articles on there as well. Kamal's also been involved in getting support for Zahra Mohammadi, who has just recently been imprisoned, well, just started being 10 years in prison for teaching Kurdish. And Bella Caledonia just this afternoon published my article on this, which included a letter of support, which was signed by Noam Chomsky and 85 other people, mainly academics. And it also included the following statement in support from Chris Law, which I'd like to read out to you. So Chris is an MP and he's the international development spokesman for the SNP. And he says, Iran's blatant domestic discrimination against any language but Persian is bad enough. But this imprisonment now is only going to add to tensions in an already dangerous region. The Kurds have need of vocal international support, and we can't turn a blind eye to the reality of their plight, not just across Syria and Turkey, but in Iran as well. The powers that be of the international community have taken every opportunity to let the Kurds down over the centuries. It is time we reversed that and supported them. So thank you, Chris. And I now want to hand over to Kamal to tell us all more about Rojhelat. He's going to speak for about half an hour, 40 minutes, and then we'll get a chance to ask questions and he can tell us a lot more. So Kamal, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, and I'm really grateful to you and the rest of your friends in Scottish Kurdish solidarity. Sorry if I get the name wrong or if I got it wrong. I'm really grateful as a Kurd, as an academic, and I hope it will continue as it is, because as you know, Kurds, giving voice to them is really a rare thing. And I myself learned about this only after Sarah sent me an email. I wasn't aware of your initiative. So thank you for providing this opportunity. And I'm really grateful to all of you. And I say hi to everyone who is present here, and thank you for watching. Rojhelat is, Kurdish story is a sad story. It's Kurdish state is a sorry state from whatever aspect you look at it. But Rojhelat case, unfortunately, is even worse because due to certain international interest in some areas of Kurdistan, sometimes you can hear more about one part of Kurdistan or the other. But for the last 40 years, pretty much people around the world heard about Kurdish Eastern Kurdistan or Rojhelat, which is the part that's dominated by Iran, is mostly when they hear every now and then. It's usually actually on a daily basis, casualties, killings of people who carry goods on their back to eke out their life and to go on with their life, or the prisoners, that political prisoners, which are, according to the last reports by the UN Special Envoy or Special Reporter, Javed Rahman, half of the entire political prisoners in Iran are Kurds, and almost half of the executed political prisoners are also Kurds, while the Kurdish population in Iran is about 10 to 12% of the entire population. So in a sense, it tells you what's going on. You can tell both about the state's approach to the Kurdish situation or to the Kurds in general, and at the same time, the very resistance that goes on. And the Kurds, despite all the pressure and the constant killing or daily killing and executions, they are still trying to hold on to their identity, to their language, and to their environment, which has become one of the major fronts of battling with the state now. So what Sarah talked about, the case of Zara Mohammadi, is just one of the latest cases that Zara Mohammadi is part of she's a part of an organization that has a state license for its cultural and linguistic activities. And she has been teaching Kurdish on voluntary basis for the last 10 years. But for each year, she has received 1 year of imprisonment sentence. So this is how the state has rewarded a voluntary teacher for teaching Kurdish language to people who don't have Kurdish literacy. So there is a lot to talk about Rojhelat. from historical perspective and at the same time the current situation in Rojhelat. Historically, since 1925, and actually we can go back a little bit earlier, 1906, 1909, when the revolution, the constitutional revolution took place in Iran, Kurds and Arabs, Turkmens, Baluchs, and most of these non-Persians were pretty much left out in the when the country's fate supposed to be decided. And it's mostly in 1925 that we actually have the modern Iran. Before, it was pretty much, even if you look at the Iranian constitution from the constitutional era, let's say 1906, 1909, we have, even the constitution does not talk about official language. There is no official language in the constitution, and there is talks about a multiple state, in a sense, about Iran, or a country with multiple protected domains, or in Persian they call mamalik mahruse, which it tells you that the modern Iran was slowly shaping, and that document and the constitution tells you that at the time before the 1925, there was no ethnic nationalism. State has not adopted any form of ethnic nationalism. And it's by 1925 when Reza Shah comes to power, pretty much criminalize all non-Persian languages and tries to structure a state, a Persian state that tries to define history based on the agency of the Persian, as Persians are the civilization and state makers, and the rest are completely non-existent. And when it comes to the language, the Persian language becomes dominant, and the rest will be pretty much banned and illegalized. And so the education, and it continues until pretty much 1979. But still the Iranian constitution, which did not have much function, was not, had not Persian language as the official language in it. And it's actually in 1979, after the 1979 constitution with the Islamic Republic, you have a greater combination of Persian nationalism and a Shia Islam that become even more militant than the previous Persian ethnic nationalism. And it's from there that Kurdistan becomes one of the major security zones. And with just in 1979, after coming back to Iran, just a few months after coming back to Iran, Khomeini declared jihad against Kurdistan. And which in a letter that a verse from Quran was cited that says Muhammad and his followers are merciful to themselves, but they are very harsh against non-Muslims, which essentially Kurds were declared as non-Muslim from the Khomeini's perspective. And then we had series of attacks and military campaigns against Kurdistan, which the state regarded it as Fath Kurdistan in Persian, and which is an Arabic name, means the conquest of Kurdistan. And it was hearkening this idea of the Fath Mecca when Prophet Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, conquered Mecca. So you have this religious, ethnic diffusion of religion and ethnicity, or ethnic nationalism, that the state adopted, the Islamic State in Iran. So there is one more important thing that I should talk about in terms of history, that after the revolution, there were two referendums, and in both referendums, Kurds voted no. So one was to the constitution because the Kurds found the constitution anti-democratic, and Kurds as a black voted against it. And there was one about the system that gave a choice whether you are for the Islamic Republic or for the previous monarchy, which people didn't have much choice, but the Kurds boycotted and completely voted no in that referendum as well. So the Kurdish reaction to the new state was entirely democratic, was based on their civil initiatives, and they were unwilling to accept democratically without doing anything this new constitution and new system. And this Kurdish reaction was the base for the state to adopt a strategy of pretty much destroying any kind of political and civil reaction to the new state. And Kurdistan in this state's language become conquered by the state. So, and from there were about 2-3 years of military campaign until the entire Kurdish region was reoccupied, and it was completely militarized. So from 1980s to 1989, in major areas of Kurdistan, most areas of Kurdistan, even cities, we had curfews from dusk to dawn, and people could not go out. So for about 10 years, we had these curfews, and many people like myself who were kids, we grew up in this kind of situation that we were, while there was Iran-Iraq war, while there was bombing, and pretty much we were completely vulnerable to bombing, but at the same time, at nights, any kind of movements were banned, and people could be shot at randomly if they left their homes. So this situation continued until 1979, with the pro-reform president came to power. So it was only then that there was certain rules were relaxed and certain regulations become changed, and then you had the booms of civil organization and NGOs that many Kurdish.
Sorry, what date was that?
It was after 1997.
1997.
1997. Yes. So when Khatami came to power, sorry if I forget to mention that. So it was from then that during Khatami, so because these internal conflict or dispute, disagreement between different parts of the state. So this gave kind of a room for to civil societies, to people, and to organize different non-NGOs to breathe, and Kurdish literature, Kurdish newspapers, journals came to the surface for the first time. But during this time, there was in Iraq, especially in 1925, we had a constitutional.
I've just muted you by mistake when I meant to click on someone else. That's better.
Do you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, that was my fault.
So, no, it's okay. So the birth of this entity on other side of the border became a subject of a great anxiety for the Iranian statesmen, and even for the ruling ethnicity, means Persians. So in 2009, a kind of new military regime that was represented by Ahmadinejad came back to power, which not only reintroduced many of the militaristic and security measures into Kurdistan. At the same time, they adopted new policies to create a situation that would pretty much aimed at making Kurdistan's future unviable, something that cannot be sustained. And Kurdistan, as a region that was politically active and very much self-conscious about its ethnic and linguistic differences, was a place that for the state represented a security threat. And based on this, Kurdistan had been, major parts of Kurdistan had been militarized. Almost every single village had at least one military base. Even inside the cities, you had various checkpoints, and almost every institution, every governmental organization, schools, universities, you had various security organizations were implanted, and they would monitor everyone's actions, everyone's reading habit, even when it comes to the students, reading habits, their association with their friends, with people, and their later admission at the universities would be based on their background, how they have acted during their, for example, high school, middle school in high school studies. So you had this kind of ensnaring surveilling regime that would surveil every single person, and especially students and young people, to predict their behaviors, to determine whether this could be potential threats to the states that would be possibly opposing the state policies. And so you had, what I am saying, it looks like mostly like the Big Brother 1975 Orwell's book. But what we had, it pretty much the implementation of this very system that, this individual surveillance, recording everyone's behaviors in schools, at the university, and all different organizations. This would determine their future employment in the public sector, as well as their admission at higher educational systems like universities, colleges, and other things. So when Ahmadinejad came back to power in 2009, this situation came back actually with a greater force, and they tried to deal with Kurdistan in a way that, as I said, Kurdistan will not have any future as a place that is ethnically different, linguistically different, and in some areas even religiously different from the rest. And so what this scholar of Gaza in Palestine, Sarah Roy, has a term describing this situation called the development, that the entire life, in essence, especially economy, becomes a tool for adopting certain policies. It becomes tool for punishment, collective punishment. And it's from there then we have something, it's from that era that we have something called Kolberi, which is people who carry goods on their back to make living. In Kurdistan, historically, there has been this cross-border trade, or whatever you want to call it. Some people call it smuggling. And at the same time, as you know, the borders are on either side of the border. Both sides of the border, you have Kurds. So there is a relation, this family ties between people, let's say, on the Iraqi side and on the Iranian side. So, but what we have here, this new situation that people in stuff using mules, donkeys, and horses and other things, they were using their back to go on with their livelihood. So there are certain issues that I want to talk about this Kolberi, which is a very important situations, because since 2015, we have close to 2,000 people have died, or either died or wounded. And sometimes the casualties, as they call it, can be up to 25 people in a day. And we have many, many underage people who have died. Actually, there was an instance just last year that 2 young boys were run over by an avalanche because they kind of stuck somewhere, one of the brother, and the other one went back to find him, and he died as well. And there were about 500 to 600 people from all the villages went to find them. So anyways, we have stories like this, that these people even have now, some of them have state IDs, and the state gives them an ID. They could use it and go, and actually when they show their IDs, security forces shoot at them sometimes. It happens many times, or throw them off the cliff, and some of them run away from the security forces, and they fall off mountain cliffs. And so we have stories like this on a regular basis. We have people who walk on landmines. So during the Iran-Iraq war, the Iran-Iraq war, 32 years ago, there were many of these mines were planted. So we still have about 16 million mines in these 4 Kurdish provinces. And many times, with the help of the international organizations, people have tried to remove these mines, but the security forces of the regime, they plant them again. So, in a sense, or there are many places that, because it's been very old, because of the floods and water running down and washing down the land, many of these mines go even to the residential areas, to villages, to places like farms and other things, and we have casualties due to this kind of situations. And the state not only has not removed these mines, they, in many places that they plant them again. So we have such a situation that constantly causes casualties, and constantly we have people hearing that they have lost their limbs, they died, and we have many people grew up entirely handicapped by losing their limbs and other things. So, and some of these Kolbers, when they run away, like at night, and usually they do that at night because of the security reasons, they walk into these landmines, especially when they are followed by the security forces of the regime. So, and this, unfortunately, because okay, the state has pretty much destroyed the region's economy, and now they are trying to create all these water dams, and so it's one of the policies of depopulating the area, and at the same time creating various markets that are usually ephemeral. They are there for, let's say, a few months, and let's say sometimes a year or two, and they attract people from the villages and causes depopulation, and then they close them, the state closed them. And so in a sense, the state uses economy as kind of like psychological games, and at the same time try to use it as a means of depopulating the area and changing the demography, and at the same time the communal culture that exists. So, and it is a way to prevent any possibility sometimes. And one of the things, the areas that they have used, especially the raising livestock, pretty much has been reduced in the last 40 years, because it was the Kurdish farmer would be able to take their animals, goats and sheep, to the mountain regions, and the state, in the name of this, would be a contact with the Kurdish resistance movement and the people. So they have prevented this kind of movements in the Kurdistan. So again, this every arena of economic life has been used by the state as a way to punish people and to direct their political and socio-political life, and to for the dispossession of the people, for displacement and things as such. So, and as in addition to that, this would be the last point, and then I let you, if there be any questions, I let the room, leave a little bit of room for the questions and answer. So there is another thing that has been a major issue, especially since 2009. It has slowly become a major issue in Kurdistan, is this issue of ecology. So in Kurdistan, so pretty much ecology has become one of another front to combat the internal colonialism, if you will. So the state uses all these forests, and intentionally they burn down various regions, and people with their own means constantly go and try to prevent deforestation, prevent the burning. And we have various people died. And actually yesterday was the anniversary of the death of four environmental activists, Sharif Bajwar and his colleagues, who people in the city of Mariwan pretty much think that they were killed by the state while they were trying to prevent the fire to spread. And we had similar things just about 2-3 months ago, that a few people died. And actually the degree of, and the situation is pretty much political. One of the people who died, and in Kurdistan, they usually refer them as the martyrs of ecology or environment. He calls one of his friends and he says, tell my son, I think he has about 2-3 years old son, says, tell him that if anything happened to me, if I die, tell him that your father was a brave man. So the thing is, the situation is, the way the situation is, when people go to prevent the fire in the forest to spread, they pretty much expect to be died or to be killed. Of course, it's very hard for us to have a conclusive, we don't have really conclusive evidence that the state kills them or creates a situation for these people to be killed. because there is no organization that is independent that could investigate this kind of cases. But due to when we look at the other aspect of this fight between Kurdish environmentalists and the state, we see how a state has become very, very sensitive and creating all kinds of problems, arresting them, and beginning with 2009, that when Ahmadinejad came to power, among the first journalists who were arrested, and some of them for a while, even people were expecting their execution, were people who were writing for journalists, for journals that or newspapers that were discussing environmental issues. So I think I'll stop here and let's have a little bit of dialogue rather than going on.
So I don't know, have we got any questions from anybody else? I've got loads of questions. Oh yes, we've got a question here from Daban Jaff. I'm just going to ask you just before we have this question, actually, if you could just say a little bit about the resistance to all this, about, you know, the Kurdish, what Kurdish political parties or Kurdish organizations. And I know that it's impossible to act openly as a political party within Iran at the moment, but you know, they go out into the Candle Mountains or whatever. So yes, if you could just say and then we've got two hands up as well, actually, but if you could just say before then just a little bit about the resistance to it from the Kurds.
So Kurdish political parties for the most part have been neutralized. Because many of them have their bases in Bashur, except for Pejak, which they have stayed out of Bashur's control or KRG's control. The rest are pretty much there, and so there has been in the last at least 25 years, they have not had any, let's say, military activities. They still have cultural activities, they still have political activities, but certainly this situation has created, in some ways, a distance between the political parties, and at the same time, it has made them less effective as they were before. As you know, Bashur is pretty much has been a battlefield between Turkey and Iran, and one side of Bashur is now pretty much under Iranian control and the other one under Turkish control. And so the parties that are running the affairs in Iraqi Kurdistan or Bashur are pretty much listening to what the Iranians demand and what the Turks demand. And so this, as I said, this situation has very much neutralized the political parties. But there are other areas that you see a great deal of resistance. One of them, as I mentioned, was this great deal of environmentalist activities. And then you have different types of cultural activities, from writing novels, poetry, organizing various cultural events, despite all the pretty much non-existent any space for Kurdishness. And Kurdishness in itself is a security subject in Iran. And so despite this, you have students at the universities, they are very active, they are working on Kurdish language, they are learning different dialects, they are writing, they have student groups pretty much in secret, of course. And then you have at the same time, in Kurdistan, gender and ethnicity are very much mixed, and you have especially women's activities at the same time are very conscious of the Kurdish situation and the state policies for the assimilation of Kurdish culture and language. So you have this intersectionality, if you will, between gender issues and cultural issues, and then you have various journals that they would be shut down every now and then, and they will reincarnate in another form with another name, and they come back to life. But so they will be around for a short while, they will be closed, and then another. So this going on, and at the same time, there is a lot of emphasis on every single thing that, or celebration, whenever there is something Kurdish going on, even outside Rojhelat, when there is something in Bashur, and it's in the interest of the Kurds, they will celebrate it. They will, many times they would be imprisoned. They supported the referendum in Iraqi Kurdistan. They joined the battle against Turkey in Afrin, in other areas of Rojava. So you have a very, very vibrant society, and then you have various Kurdish NGOs that, like, for example, what you have created by Zara Mohammadi, Nujin, and others, that so they will be closed sometimes, but again, they will find another form to come back to life. And so this constant, let's say, this is almost like a hide and seek or fight and run. It's a kind of guerrilla cultural warfare, and that is going on in Kurdistan.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So we'll now, if we can, I'll ask Daban, who's been very waiting patiently. Can you unmute?
Hello, Sarah.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sarah, and Scottish Solidarity with Kurdistan for bringing Dr. Kamal here. I have to say, Dr. Kamal is one of the most prominent Kurdish scholars. It's so happy to have him here and to ask him a few questions. To be honest, I have so many questions, but I will try to force myself to ask few questions. My first question is, Kaktor, do you think that Iran or the Islamic regime has succeeded in assimilating the southern parts of Kurdistan in the provinces of Lorestan and Kermashan, and assimilating their identity into the Iranian or pan-Iranianism identity? This is the first question. The second question would be, what is the status of feminism movement in Rojhelat? And
what movement? I'm sorry, feminism.
Feminism, yes. If times allow, I would like you to ask one more question, which is there's always saying that people saying that Rojhelat case was always a hostage of Bashur. To what extent we can say that this argument is valid and is true? Thank you very much again for this nice presentation. And thank you, Sarah, and the Scottish Solidarity with Kurdistan for bringing Dr. Soleiman. Thank you all.
About the first question, so I don't have anything to take notes, Sarah. If I forget, I noticed that you were taking notes. Thank you, Kagdaban. I appreciate, they are very important questions. So there is the parts of Kurdistan that Kagdaban was asking this question about is a little different from the rest, because here we have this religious factor that affects the Kurdish situation and the Kurdish politics. Parts of Lorestan and Kermashan are religiously Shiis. And the Kurdish nationalism has historically, or the Sunni areas like what they call it Mukriyan around Mahabad, Piranshahar, Sardasht, Bukan, these regions, for people who are familiar, they are actually the hotbeds of Kurdish nationalism historically, and what I consider to be the first Kurdish nationalist movement that started around 1880, it was actually took place in this region. And then even Kurdistan Republic also was in Mahabad, and before we had other movements like the one that was led by Simco. So the common religion, or this common religious denomination between the center and the periphery in many areas has been effective. And in some ways it has affected the language, and at the same time has affected people in terms of their ethnic self-consciousness and self-differentiation from the rest. But in reality, in those very Kurdish regions that are mostly Shiis, thanks to the Islamic Republic, they have been pretty much awakened to the discriminatory nature of the state in Iran, and how Kurdishness is a problem, regardless whether you are a Shi'i or Sunni. I don't want to say that it's the entire population in those regions would have this degree of awareness, but it is pretty much prevalent now, especially since the last 20 years, it has become very, very strong, because especially what happened in the last few years in Serpol-e-Zahab and other regions, when they were affected by series of earthquakes, the state was completely inattentive to them, and the Kurds from various regions, even from outside Iranian boundaries, from the south, were sending their supports, and it was the Islamic Revolutionary Guards would prevent such aids, because they were afraid that it would create a new solidarities and affects Kurdish consciousness in the entire region. But after 4 or 5 years, people in Serpol-e-Zahab, many of them still are homeless. They are exposed to the cold and to the heat. And you have this extreme cold and extreme heat. And all this tells people that, so you have people from the furthest points of Kurdistan sending their aids. And actually, when last year, there was an earthquake in Qutur, which would be above Urumia region in the furthest parts of Kurdistan, closer to the Turkish borders. People from these affected people were sending their aids to Qutur. So it tells you the degree of solidarity that has been created in Kurdistan, the very suffering, as Ernest Renan would say, that creates a nation. And the common suffering and the common state approach to Kurds, regardless whether they are Shi'i or Sunni, and treating them as Kurds indiscriminately, has created this consciousness that regardless we are Kurds. So as for the second question, yes, feminism is a very strong thing and a very strong movement in Kurdistan. And I think it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Kurdish movement, whatever historical factors might have, I'm talking about the various movements and political parties, whatever historical factors might have contributed to that, we have the strongest feminist movements in entire Kurdistan, all parts. And actually, it might be a news to many of my fellow Kurds that in 1880s, when a Kurdish religious figure, according to the missionary reports, in 1880s, when a Kurdish sheikh, religious figure, led a movement, he had women soldiers. So we see women's participation in Mahabad Republic. We see women's participation in 1970s Kurdish movement, of course, varying degrees, but since 1979, almost all the Kurdish parties in Rojhelat have been very much conscious in about the feminist movements and women's rights, but later, especially the things, the initiatives of PKK has been very, very fundamental in making the entire Kurdish society very much aware of the women's right. And but what we have in Rojhelat, despite the fact being a woman is almost like being a Kurd in itself is a problem to the state. So feminist, if you are a feminist and a Kurd, you become a doubly dangerous person. So there is certainly a lot of pressure and a lot of problem for any women's movement, whether they are Kurds or not. But if you are a Kurd and a woman and you are a feminist, you have greater problem that you face. And so we have a volcano that we don't see it, but Kurdistan, there is a great deal of cultural and feminist activities in Kurdistan. They go hand in hand. Well, the third question was about whether East Kurdistan is a hostage of Iraqi Kurdistan or Bashur. In some way, it's true. There is one thing that, as someone from Rojhelat myself, I can attest to that. It is that the Kurds in Rojhelat have been very much sensitive to what is going on to Bashur. They have been trying to create the least obstacle possible for the experience in Bashur to be successful. Unfortunately, the fact that the two main parties in Bashur that have no nation building agenda in essence, and they have pretty much been dependent on Iran and Turkey, and Kurdish situation has always been a secondary issue for them, has created a lot of problem, and they have been pretty much able to neutralize Kurdish political parties from Rojhelat. This is a reality. But so it's a long story and a long history. We cannot discuss all aspects of it, but in some way it's true that they have prevented and tried to neutralize Kurdish movement in Rojhelat. I'm talking about these two Kurdish political parties in Bashur. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And really interesting questions as well. I think, does Ammar, do you still want to, you did have your hand up before, are you still there, still want to ask a question? And then Hanifi has definitely got, yes. So Ammar and then Hanifi. Oh, do I have to, sorry, we need to unmute you, don't we? Where have you gone? Yeah. Can you? Ammar, can you? Have we done that? Yeah, and then Paul as well after Hanifi. Amar, we lost you. You're unmuted. You there? Yeah. Amar, you able to speak to us? Oh, okay. Let's go back to, we can come back to you, and I'll ask Hanifi then to unmute you, Hanifi. Hanifi, you there?
Yes, I'm here now. It's unmuted. Okay. You hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Sarah, for the presentation and inviting Dr. Soleimani. And thank you very much, Dr. Soleimani. Very nice meeting you for the first time.
Same here, likewise. I'm very happy to see you.
Very happy to see you too. And thank you very much for your activism and your enormous contribution to, of course, the scholarship on Kurdish issues or Kurdish culture in 4 parts, actually. So I was hoping that we could meet when I was in Turkey, but unfortunately you left the university very early, 2015, I guess. Thank you very much for the presentation. I was wondering, just as Sarah pointed out at the beginning of the presentation, we know very little or nothing actually about Iranian Kurdistan, social political movements over there. It's partly because of us and partly because probably of the oppression over there. So I couldn't help but notice that most of the points you have made are kind of matching with what we have experienced in Turkey, starting from 1925 or 23 in the case of Turkish Kurdistan. So I vaguely remember that scholarship has pointed out that Reza Shah was actually emulating Mustafa Kemal and his oppressive nationalist, even racist politics in Iran. So many oppressors learned a lot from Turkey, or many dictators learned a lot from Turkey. All the rest of issues like the cross-bordering trade that the Kurds have been involved in because they have families or people on the other side of the border, and they keep crossing the border and they keep getting killed or wounded because of that. The rest of issues like environmental destruction through fires and dams. So all of these seem very, very familiar to us. I wonder, since you were in Turkish Kurdistan as well for a while, what is the main thing that separates Iranian Kurdistan from Bakur, Rojhelat from Bakur? And what is the main thing that separates or the main difference between the oppression in Turkey and the one in Iran? And another thing, I think it was asked, but I was wondering if there is a we see many Kurdish activists or the politicians are facing courts or imprisonment or death, but individually, I don't. No collective organization or no collective movement comes to mind very easily that is kind of legally operating within Iranian Kurdistan. We know Komala or Pejak, but these are all illegal parties. I wonder if there is a dominant legal political movement like the HDP in Turkey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Barish. I'm very happy to see you. Dr. Barish went through a lot in the last few years. That's why I'm very happy to see him.
Thank you.
So for the people who don't know that, he really faced a lot of hardship from the state, especially when the state started to securitize academia in Turkey. When it comes to the, so they say the great minds think alike, but I think oppressive people think alike as well, more so. Not only Reza Shah learned from Mustafa Kemal, actually Hitler learned from him a lot. And there is a great book for people who don't know. There is a book called by one of the professors at Princeton University that says Ataturk in the Nazi imagination. So I really recommend this book. And he learned a lot of things from the march and other things, which we don't have time to go in to discuss. But yes, there was a certain degree of a lot of affinity between the policy of those two states to begin with, from 1924 and 25, which almost Reza Shah and Ataturk came to power almost the same time. So in 1924, the caliphate was abolished. You had the republic, and then in Iran, the Reza Shah was trying to create a republic after the coup, but the mullahs thought it would be something, a system of that with only infidels supported. That's all they knew about Republican system. So that's why they advised the Shah to Reza Shah to stay with monarchy, to stick to monarchy. So, but in terms of ethnic nationalism or racism, if you will, they learned a lot from each other. But there was one difference between the two states. Actually, the reality is Iran is a lot more multinational. Unfortunately, to the Kurds in Bakur, the Kurds in Bakur represents they are the rest of the minorities, if you will. I don't like this word, but non-Turks, except in addition to the Kurds, are very, very minor in terms of the size of their population, which it's very bad for Kurds because they can be the only criminals exist in the region. So, but in Iran, you have a situation that we have it's a multinational country. We have Turks, which in Iran, they don't fare well, they don't do well, unlike Turks in Turkey. We have Kurds, we have Arabs, we have Turkmens, we have Baluch, we have Lurs. So this multi-ethnic structure of the country has been helpful to the Kurds in essence because the state has to oppress many, many people, which is a Persian state. So instead of just focusing on the Kurds, they have to deal with a lot. But the Kurds have been very active from probably before many of the other groups for whatever historical reasons. And in 1927, it's very important to just to look at the comparison, to see the similarity between these two states' policy, one that had already committed genocide, I'm talking about Turkey, but in the other side, we have instances, they are very close, if they are not genocide in Iran, they are very close to genocide according to the Persian historians, So what we have, in 1927, one of the figures that is usually looked as a kind of philosopher king in Iran, Foroughi, wrote to Shah that we cannot kill all the Kurds. So it wasn't feasible, it wasn't possible. Politically, it wasn't expedient, whatever we cannot meant. But then we have to find a way. We understand our Turkish friends' concerns, but we have to find a way to really make the Kurds like us. So they want, it's not possible to remove them physically. So this was the thing, that the state in as early as 1927 realized that the destruction of the entire Kurdish population was not possible. So, but this situation was one of the major differences that created between Turkey and Iran. But later we had, when there was a Kurdish movement going on in Iraq and other places, and many of Arab states, Abdul Karim Qasim in Iraq was very, in the beginning, receptive to Kurdish demand, and thanks to the British colonialism, we had certain rights for the Kurds. It's the only place that you can thank colonialism. So, and then it was already in the constitution, and then Qasim adopted a new policies, and there were new laws that would accommodate Kurds in many ways, and Iraq was declared as a two-nation state. So, and then you had Jamal Abdel Nasser at the same time supporting the Kurds, as it was part of the rivalry between Shah, and then you had Qasim. So this kind of international situation made the Iranian statesmen to think their Kurdish policy, and they adopted a new way of thinking about the Kurdish situation. So they said, we cannot destroy them, but we have to assimilate them by calling them the most original Iranians and the protectors of our borders. So and you see the hierarchical relation. And then, so they created, while Kurdish language was not allowed to be taught, or there was no Kurdish education, they created a number of radios that would propagate state policy, as the way Erdogan does through TRT6 and other things. So they started very late in Turkey. So this was one of the things that they realized they cannot do that. But another difference that we can talk about now, and is Turkey for a long time, especially since 1950s, has been close to Herrenvolk, or an ethnocratic state, in the sense that in Turkey you have had an ethnic democracy. The Turks had their own democracy. Okay, it has a lot of problems, but there has been certain aspects of democracy. There has been features of democracy, like elections, like let's say, quote unquote, free media and things. So, but free press. But again, it has always been a half-hearted democracy. But in Kurdistan, you had never had even any aspects of democracy, because the Turkish democracy could not be extended to the Turks, as by definition, it was an ethnic or Turkish democracy. So the Turkish democracy and the power relations sometimes has created a situation that Kurdish votes mattered. And this, as we see it now, especially since 2002, Kurdish votes have been very much determinant in the way the state acts. And the state's practice have pretty much reflected their approach to the Kurdish state, whether there are Kurdish votes. If there were Kurdish votes, there would be possibility to talk about even peace process. If there was a disappointment about Kurdish votes, they become separatists and they had to be destroyed. Even their religions become Armenian, or whatever you want to call it. So, but in Iran, we haven't had even an ethnic democracy or ethnocracy like Turkey. So that's why the Kurds have not been able to be participant in the political process. The political process has been entirely shut down to the Kurds. That's why it has not been possible for groups like PhD or parties like PhD to grow or to come to the being, because in Turkey, especially after the rise of HDP, it was possible to think about Kurdish politics as somewhat legitimate. But Kurdish politics in any forms, whether with armed struggle, whether you want democracy for Iran, which mostly the Kurdish parties have asked for democracy for Iran historically, and then autonomy for Kurdish region. But Kurdish politics in itself is illegitimate. It's haram. It's wrong. It's like a bastard politics. So you cannot be a Kurd and talk about Kurdish politics, because the very invocation of such politics would mean that you would question the state nationalism, which is entirely based on or centered around Persian nationalism, Persian history, Persian language, Persian culture, and the denial of the rest. So that's why we don't have groups. Actually, I forgot the other question, I'm sorry. What was the other question? Can you unmute here, Sarah?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, actually, you answered the second question. That's why you don't have collective groups or political parties or movements like mass political movements in Iranian Kurdistan. You actually explained it. That was the second question. So I got my answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, does that mean it's my turn? Okay, thank you. Rojbash, Professor Soleimani, really
Rojbash, thank you.
A wonderful talk, and I will stick to one line of questioning. I mean, there's so much we could talk about, whether it's the Mahabad Republic, Qasim Muhammad, whether it's, Mossadegh and his relationship with the Kurds, I mean, genealogy, democratic controls. I will stick to the present. So your talk, you basically took us through to the end of Ahmadinejad. And so the question I have is after that. So now with President Rouhani, he's often cast in the West as some sort of reformer, that you had this ebb and flow. You had Khatami was a reformer, and then Ahmadinejad was anti-reform, and now Rouhani is supposed to be another reformer, and Iran was supposed to become a less repressive regime. That's often how he's cast, and yet the situation for the majority of Kurds in Rojhelat has remained very, very difficult. So maybe you could give us an idea, first of all, to what extent the Rouhani reforms have brought anything positive to the Kurdish population. And the second part of that question would be, what are the limitations of Rouhani? Is it because the Ayatollah Khamenei is preventing him from going further? And just if you could just add, we hear population differences in Rojhelat. Sometimes they talk 6 million, sometimes they talk 12 million. So what is the correct population count in Rojhelat among the Kurdish population? Thank you.
Thank you. So let's start with the population. Usually they say 8 to 12 million. So the figures, as you know, in both Turkey and Iran are very political. Censuses are very political, and the logic of the state has been, if you have a bigger size of population, you might have some rights. But and if, let's say, half of Turkey were Kurds, probably they would have, they would be granted some rights. So the same thing, that because very much they have tried to deny the existence of the Kurds, or deny any differences, even if say there are Kurds, but whether they're some form of Turks or some forms of Persians. So this is one of the things. And the other thing is completely political, that the size mattered there from the state's logic. In order to have rights, you have to be man or you have to have great sizes. So it's the same logic. But if you come back to the issue of Rouhani has been actually worse than Ahmadinejad by every standard. If you, Ahmadinejad now is in the opposition, criticizing the state and questioning the state policy and questioning its fairness, questioning freedom in Iran. So when you have Ahmadinejad in the opposition and asks the legitimacy of the state, talks about the censorship, talks about freedom, talks about injustice, then it's like when salt needs salt. So this is this kind of situation that you don't have anything beyond that. So Rouhani has been pretty much pretty much in the pockets of the Revolutionary Guards Corps, and has implemented everything that and followed every line or every order of the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, has not shown any difference with him in the last 4 years. And at the time when it comes to the, since Rouhani has come to power, we have increased number of execution compared to Ahmadinejad's time. We have greater censorship. We have greater imprisonment. And what happened 2 years ago, what happened last year, that even last year, according to I think to Reuters, that about 1,500 people were killed on the streets for complaining about the prices of oil, so prices of gas. So we have a situation like this. In 2 years earlier, when they arrested many of these, I'm not talking about just the Kurds, I'm talking about the entire Iran, that when people were arrested, many of them were killed, and they would say they committed suicide. And there are some people from Ahmadinejad's, Rouhani's cabinet were making comments about it and making fun of it, laughing that, oh, some of them committed suicide. So when it comes to killing Kurdish Kolbars, it has been doubled since Rouhani has come to power. When it comes to the securitization of Kurdistan, it has been worse than Ahmadinejad's time. When you talk about all different policies, even in terms of reforming the education, they have been a greater forms of discriminatory policies. In Rouhani's time, we have the zoning of education, which prevents non-Persians access pretty much to the central universities, which are actually the prestigious universities. And at the same time, it kind of creates a form of segregation. In one of my co-authored articles, I talk about all this stuff. It's actually about Kolbari as well, that we talk about apartheid economy, apartheid education, and all. So list goes on. And then it's in Rouhani's time that we have actually in terms of dealing with, it was last 2 years ago that the education department, which in that statement about Zahra Mohammadi, we talked about for non-Persian preschoolers, a lack of Persian proficiency has become an anomaly that the state has to take certain measures about it. So they pretty much, on a lack of proficiency in Persian language has been categorized as a biological impediment, if you will. So these are all at the time. And when the referendum was taking place in Erbil in 2017, both Ahmadinejad and actually the Iranian regime had a greater deal of interference in the referendum, and both Turkey and Iran declared people in Erbil voting about their fate as their national security. So this logic of this racist state that occurred in Argentina, this is a quote from one of the previous Turkish official. Even in Argentina, if demand their rights, it would be Turkish or now Persian state security, national security issue. So Rouhani flirted and tried to pose like a reformist, but in essence, he has been worse than Ahmadinejad, because Ahmadinejad was actually truer to his claims, and he was pretty much known. But Hassan Rouhani, people expected to be a figure somewhat like Khatami, regardless of all the disappointment that's associated with him, but he turned out to be worse than Ahmadinejad. And then, not just in the Kurdish region, in the last 2-3 years, when there have been demonstration, people protesting on the streets, one of the frequently chanted line was, neither reform nor hardliners, the end of the story. Okay. نا اصول گرا نا اصلاح طلب نا اصول گرا تمام شد ماجرا, means people consider the reforms that the reform is for many people it might not be the case, but they saw it as a kind of political ploy that was introduced to by the regime to make its life longer. So and Hassan Rouhani pretty much nailed that thing, that coffin of the reform, even for people who had some belief in that. Yes.
Thank you. And I know that you're teaching this afternoon, and it's afternoon for you, it's evening for us. And we shouldn't go on a lot longer. I don't think, as far as I know, we've got any other questions, though I, of course, have loads, but I'm just going to ask you one and then ask you perhaps after that if you'd like to round up anything else that you feel you'd like to say. But we've been talking a lot, particularly the comparison with Turkey, and I was wondering if you could say a little bit about, obviously, the relationship between Turkey and Iran. I mean, what unites them, of course, is joint hatred of Kurds.
Yes.
So, but otherwise, they don't like each other very much. So just wondering how that all plays out and how much they manage to cooperate together in the attacks on Kurds in the Kandil Mountains or in other places.
So the reality is, both Turkey and Iran and Syria, if it could, they consider Kurdish situation as a national security situation. And when you have, as the Zahra Mohammadi's case evidences, that even teaching Kurdish language is a security case for the state. So you have the same situation in Turkey, and in Turkey, sometimes even when it comes to the Kurdishness and Kurdish language becomes even worse, because if people hear you sing Kurdish, you can be mutilated or you can be stabbed to death, and then no one knows who did it. And mostly it goes unnoticed, and there is usually social media, and Kurdish social media talks about this. So by talking about this example, I just want to show for people who has not experienced Turkish-Iranian racism. These things sounds or seems real. It doesn't really make sense to have such a degree of hatred to the entire population, and you think of the entire population or an ethnic group as a threat. And whatever relates to them, whatever defines them, whatever cultural linguistic signifiers that attributes to them be considered like as a kind of a military action against the state. So this is the thing, that they have a lot of differences, especially I'm talking about Turkey and Iran when it comes their politics in Syria, their politics in Iraq, their strategies in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Libya, and everywhere, because now both of these countries trying to become a regional imperial power and try to pretty much occupy the region, and they take their war with the US, with other places or other countries outside of their countries, and what they call it these strategic depth that they are trying to expand it as much as possible, which of course, hopefully it will bankrupt them both economically, because having such great dreams and imperial dreams require some economy, which I don't think any of them could sustain them for a long time. But the reality is, even the way I see it, pretty much their expansionist policies, again, to contain the Kurdish situation. And to me, the way I saw it, when Turkey first changed its relation with Assad, more than creating more than creating an Islamic Brotherhood regime in Turkey, to me it was the states or Turkish state's plan was to engineer the change in that country to pretty much neutralize Kurdish or the possibility, destroy any possibility for Kurdish self-rule in Rojava. So many people see it only as a kind of Ottomanist dreams, but actually they were Ottomanist dream, but as more than the Ottomanist dreams of the current regime in Turkey, it was to destroy any grounds for a Kurdish entity to come to the being the way, for example, what we had in Iraqi Kurdistan. So, and at the same time, Iranian regime does the same thing, but for them, containing Kurds in Iraq, containing Kurds in Syria, and destroying the possibility of emerging Kurdish entity would be the first priority. And for instance, what we have in Afrin and depopulating the Afrin and repopulating with all sorts of terrorists that they could find in the world. It's not something that the Iranian regime has talked about much. So it tells you how the Kurdish situation is the first determining factor in this two states policy. And they could have many, many disagreements, but at the end, when it comes to the Kurdish issue, they could put every kind of differences they have aside and agree on how to approach the Kurdish situation. Yes.
Thank you. I don't know if you wanted, if there's anything, even if there's something more positive maybe that you'd like to end on, but I would just, before giving you a last word, no more questions from the Facebook, but we have had solidarity greetings from people in India and from people in Sweden. And it's really great to be able to, you know, have you in Mexico being able to bring us all this news about what's happening to Kurds in Iran and Turkey and Syria. So yes, if you'd like, if there's a last word that you'd like to say, it's yours.
I want to thank everyone, especially people from India and what was the other place? Sweden, for their solidarity and for staying with us, everyone. Yes, there is one positive note, and which, despite all the horror that we discussed, there is one reality that if they want a humane system, a democratic system in any of those countries, it cannot exist despite the Kurds. And actually, the Kurds would be the main factor for creating any just, humane, democratic, and gender neutral system in a way. And the Kurds are, yes, they suffer a lot, and actually they are under attack, and this extraordinary pressure that exists and the recklessness of the international community's policy, whatever this might be, and the rise of charlatans like Donald Trump and all types like this has created an extraordinary situation for the Kurds. And probably it has been the most difficult times, the last especially 5 years for the Kurds. But the Kurds are still alive, they are vibrant, they are determined, and they are willing to die for keeping trees alive. So if you have people who care so much about the ecology, about green, about trees, about grass, and they have produced so much poetry and literature, and so these are people that cannot go away. They are strong, and they have there is spirituality in Kurdish movement, if you will, this love for the nature, for animals, that this is something that is a force that everyone that has to reckon with. So my advice is that, okay, friends in the Middle East, we have no choice but live together and in a humane way. We don't have to kill each other. There is a lot, as Charlie Chaplin said, there is a big world that we can all live in and live in peace, and we really don't need what we have. And if there is any false assumption that the Kurds will be destroyed and they will go away, no, they are there and they will stay there. And the more world knows about them, I'm sure they will appreciate their strengths and resilience and their love for their environment, for their culture, and for language, so, and for humanity. So this my last remarks. And so thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm grateful and very happy to know all of you.
And thank you very much. And certainly it's our experience that more and more people are coming to know about the Kurds. So that's another very positive note too. Thank you. And thanks everybody who's been listening, and good night.